This police station in Camps Bay, Cape Town, has one of the most beautiful views in the world. But it is here, in the early hours of the 16th of April 2006, that the details of one of the most senseless crimes begins to emerge.
I drove around Cape Town like a crazy person, calling everyone, going everywhere, and there was just nothing, couldn't find them.
Finally, in the early hours of Monday morning, the police had chased hundreds of people away from the police station in Camps Bay because they said they couldn't cope with it. There were so many people that had congregated there that had been looking for the boys.
"27-year-old Richard Bloom and 28-year-old Brett Goldin were close friends. They had grown up together and both were enjoying successful careers, Richard as an upcoming fashion designer, Brett as a well-known actor. Brett was due to leave for the UK to take part in a production of the Shakespeare play Hamlet. Just days before his departure, on Saturday the 15th of April, he and his friend Richard attended a dinner party in Camps Bay.
We were kind of invited at the last minute, and because of that, I decided that I didn't want to go. So Richard went with Brett and didn't come home.
We were going to spend the evening together, and then after dinner, Richard phoned to ask if he could join us, and he came and I gave him supper, and then they said they were going off to Craig Port's house just for a quick cup of coffee.
Investigating officer Kenneth Speed knows the city's streets well. He has 20 years of experience and has investigated some of South Africa's most violent crimes.
According to Mr. Port, Brett and Richard were the first to leave, and they left just after midnight.
They stopped as they were leaving. Brett's mad about animals, just to sort of play with a little puppy that somebody had there.
This would be the last photograph taken of Brett alive.
Early on in the evening, Clinton Davids, Siobhan Marley, Jade Weingart and Noorshah Davids were celebrating Siobhan Marley's birthday party in Long Street, Cape Town. Just before midnight, they decided they were going to steal a car. And then they started driving towards Camps Bay in search of an appropriate vehicle to steal.
Brett's had a new Peugeot, which he'd worked very, very hard for. And Richard had a Polo. And Brett walked with Richard to his car. And the next thing, these criminals drove past looking for a car to hijack. And they saw the two men standing at the Polo, and they were after a Polo. That they did a U-turn and came back and held them up.
For the two men, it marks the start of a night of terror.
Clinton Davids and Siobhan Marley exited the vehicle and pointed their firearms at Brett and Richard.
To this day, don't know why they kidnapped them, because they handed over everything. The car keys, Brett showed them where his car was. The car keys for both cars, their wallets, their watches, their cell phones, their money, credit cards, everything.
From Camps Bay, the hijackers head towards the cableway in convoy. Their two victims now in the back seat of the BMW. They stop at a small parking lot overlooking the city, their regular drinking spot.
Brett didn't believe in evil. He only looked for the good in people. And I just think about the terrible disillusionment and the fear and the disbelief he must have felt when such evil crossed his path.
At that stage, the plan was still to leave Brett and Richard somewhere alive.
A chain of events follows that will determine whether the two young men live or die.
The vehicles were parked in this gravel parking lot, and Brett and Richard were told to get out of the vehicle. Clinton Davids then instructed Brett and Richard to remove their clothing, which they did. Their clothing was taken to the edge of the mountainside and thrown over, so that it would not be easily accessible to Brett and Richard when they left.
Brett and Richard, now naked, are tied up. One of the attacker's cell phones rings. As he answers, the gun in his pocket goes off.
Clinton was concerned that neighbors would start phoning the police to report hearing the shot and that the police would investigate. It was decided then that Brett and Richard would then be placed in the boot of the Volkswagen Polo, and Jade and Nushad Davids would take the silver BMW back to Nushad's house, and Clinton and Siobhan would drive to a different location to leave Brett and Richard.
While the two younger men drive back to the working-class suburb of Crawford on the other side of town, Clinton Davids and Siobhan Marley go in search of a place to leave their victims. That place is here, on the off-ramp of the M5, one of Cape Town's busiest highways. But in the early morning hours, it's deserted.
The Volkswagen Polo got bogged down in loose sand, more or less in the center of that area. They couldn't get the motor vehicle moving again, and they decided that they needed the help of Brett and Richard. So they both got out and opened the boot and got Brett and Richard out to help push, to try and see if they could get the vehicle moving again. This was unsuccessful. Brett and Richard were instructed to lie down on their stomachs, while Clinton instructed Siobhan to hold a firearm on them, and if either of Brett and Richard moved, he was instructed to shoot them. Either Brett or Richard, obviously terrified, screamed.
Both men are shot twice, killed in an instant. After contacting friends to help them tow the immobile Polo, Clinton Davids and Siobhan Marley leave the scene, leaving Brett and Richard's naked bodies uncovered and in the dark. The two men return to Crawford to continue their celebrations at Nushad Davids' home. But Siobhan Marley then decides to return to Camps Bay to get Brett's car, the Peugeot that had been left behind in the robbery.
He wanted the Peugeot as his birthday present. Siobhan would drive the vehicle of another friend who had arrived there, Ramiz Said. It was a blue Toyota Taz. However, Ramiz was reluctant to allow Siobhan to drive the vehicle on his own and accompanied him back to Camps Bay. Clinton Davids contacted them and requested to go with. So they turned around and went back to Nushad's house and picked up Clinton.
Once back in Camps Bay, the men cannot find the original location of the robbery and kidnapping. Intoxicated and drugged up, their driving is erratic, and the men are noticed by a resident of the area.
As he was proceeding up Camps Bay Drive, this member of the public noticed in front of him that there was a blue Toyota Taz parked on the left-hand side of the road with its reverse lights on. He then tried to proceed around this vehicle, and this vehicle then disengaged the reverse gear and continued to drive in front of him. The Toyota Taz then slowed down for no reason, and he then passed this vehicle on the right-hand side. He turned right into Rottingdean Road and noticed that the blue Toyota Taz was now following him. He now formed the strong belief that the occupants of that vehicle were going to rob him. He kept to the left-hand side and forced the Toyota Taz to pass on his right-hand side and proceed into Fulham Road, which is a cul-de-sac. There was a police van in Fulham Road that was attending a disturbance of the peace complaint.
The police van blocks the road, forcing the Toyota Taz to stop. The three occupants are ordered out of the car.
Once backup arrived, the three occupants were searched, and in the possession of Siobhan Marley, the police found one round of live 2 small bags of what appeared to be drugs and a credit card in the name of B.M. Goldin. It was decided that the 3 occupants would be taken to the Camps Bay police station and they were detained for questioning.
By late Sunday morning, the 16th of April, the victims' families know something is terribly wrong. Brett is due to meet his mother here at the Winchester Mansions Hotel in a neighbouring suburb for breakfast. He doesn't show up.
Just before I was leaving to go there, I got a call from the bank, from Nedbank, to say that the police had contacted them to find out address and details of a card holder, and it was my son. They'd found his card on some people they'd arrested the early hours of the morning. And I just thought to myself, maybe Brett and Richard had gone for a drink somewhere and he'd left his card. I was a little bit disturbed, but not terribly. Anyway, I then went to wait for him at the hotel, and by the time 11:15 came, I started getting very edgy. 11:30 came, I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. So I called Brian Hellman and asked if he'd seen Richard, and he said no. And he came charging over to meet me at the hotel.
And at that point, I realized that something was really wrong. And also the police had called and told Denise that they had picked these guys up for sort of reckless driving in Camps Bay, and they had Brett's credit cards. So at that point, Denise and I met, and it just became a complete manhunt, looking for them. I mean, I drove around Cape Town like a crazy person, calling everyone, going everywhere, and there was just nothing, couldn't find them.
Meanwhile, the police interrogation of the 3 men continues.
Siobhan Marley and Ramiz Saeed indicated that they would be prepared to assist the police and take them to where they believed Richard and Brett to be. At that stage, the police were under the assumption that both Rhett and Bridget were still alive.
Brett and Richard's families and friends continue their own searches, many gathering at the Camps Bay police station for news, still hopeful that the men are alive.
The moment I knew something awful had happened is when the guys walked out. I mean, Camps Bay police station was full of people. Why they looked into my eyes I demanded it. And when I looked into their eyes and I saw the absolute rage and the wall between them and humanity, I knew he was gone.
Ramiz Saeed wasn't party to the initial robbery or the kidnapping or the murder of Brett and Richard. The only information that he had was the information that he gained from the conversation between Clinton Davids and Siobhan Marley in the Toyota Taz while they were going back to Camps Bay to look for Brett's car. All he had was an indication that it was a treed area on the one side of the M5.
The M5 highway is one of the main routes into the city, but the area where the crime happened is cloaked in darkness. Despite this, Ramiz Saeed remembers the location his friends had pointed out to him.
Ramiz Saeed sat down and put his head between his knees, and just ahead of him were the bodies of Brett and Richard in an open field.
The missing person investigation becomes a double murder investigation.
On Monday morning at about 6 a.m., I was at that point back at the Camps Bay police station. One of the policemen came to the window of my car. I rolled down the window, and he said to me that we found them and they're dead. It was as if the world's just kind of ended.
Couldn't believe it. You know, in your heart, in my heart, I knew, I could feel it. But when you actually hear it, you just simply cannot believe it. And everything after there's kind of like a blank.
At the time of the murder, we were both sort of at the beginning of these wonderful careers. And his life, our relationship, our dreams, our plans, everything was just dead in that moment.
The police investigation intensifies. Several more people are arrested.
Noorshah Davids and Jade Weingart were arrested shortly after the discovery of the bodies. Ballistic tests confirmed that the weapon pointed out by Jade Weingart was indeed a murder weapon.
If only I had known it was my last night with you in my life. I pray a miracle would have stopped the dawn. And when you'd smile at me, I would look into your eyes and make sure you knew that my love for you goes on and on. If only I had known. If only I had known.
Family and friends across South Africa go into mourning. The brutality of the crime, the wasted talent of the victims, and the seemingly inhumane attitude of the attackers captures the imaginations of people around the world. The horrific crime makes international headlines, placing the spotlight on the underbelly of crime that exists in one of South Africa's biggest tourist attractions.
We had tremendous support from the South African community at large, from all over the world. And people just came, strangers, to offer their sympathy and to be with us.
Within months, the case against the men accused of kidnapping, robbing, and ultimately killing Brett and Richard is wrapped up. The four main players, Siobhan Marley, Clinton Davids, Jade Weingart, and Noorshah Davids, enter into plea and sentence negotiations, avoiding a trial. After just several appearances in the Western Cape High Court, it's over. Marley, the trigger man, as well as Clinton Davids, are sentenced to an effective 28 years behind bars. Weingart and Noorshah Davids to an effective 12.
Often families want answers about what happened to their loved ones, but often hearing those answers is extremely traumatic.
When entering into a plea bargain with the state, South African courts are more lenient with criminals who tell the full story. But for Brett and Richard's families, the one question they never answered was why they killed the two men instead of leaving them unharmed as originally planned.
Why they had to take them when it wasn't busy, it was really well after midnight. I don't know why they had to kidnap them.
I don't understand what they've done. I don't think that I'll ever forgive them for what they've done. What they did was horrific. These people took two wonderful men who were at the start of their life and ended it for nothing.
Jade Weingart and Noorshah Davids, who were not involved in the murders, serve just 7 years of their sentences and are released on parole in June 2014.
They got a second chance by virtue of the fact that they'd been granted parole. Richard and Brett didn't get a second chance. There was no second chance for them, but there was second chance for these two guys who got parole from the 1st of June.
Family members of Brett and Richard fought Jade Weingart and Noorshah Davids' parole 3 times, but they lost the fight when the men applied for parole for the 4th time.
Knowing that they're going to be out on parole, it's a finality. We don't have the terrible, terrible trauma that came about with each parole hearing, because you go right back to the very beginning.
Siobhan Marley and Clinton Davids remain behind bars, but they will be eligible for parole in the year 2020. By then, they will have served half of their 28-year sentences.
Life has to go on. My heart was shattered, having lost Richard, but you can't say let bygones be bygones, because not in a murder trial like this.
Richard's father is left with just his memories. Photographs of Richard and his twin brother Derek take him back to happier times. Since his son's murder, Tony Bloom has become widowed. losing his wife to cancer.
I think her illness was due to the loss of Richard, because they were hell of close, very close.
Brett's father also died just 9 months after the murder. Denise believes his death was caused by a broken heart. Her son and husband are buried in this Jewish cemetery in Johannesburg. Not far from them is Richard's grave. And for their loved ones, life has never been the same again. Since then, Denise has started a website called The Worst Club in the World for parents who have lost their children.
I can feel him, I can see him still so clearly. To me, time stopped. Yes. To Brett, to friendship, to life, to Brett.
Once a year, she invites Brett's friends to join her in remembering him. Richard's partner, Brian, comes to this beach. It's his way of feeling closer to him. Since the murders, he has written a book about grief. As a clinical psychologist, he hopes to help others through his own experiences.
It basically describes the grieving process that I went through and the grieving process that anyone would go through with any significant loss.
Almost a decade has passed since this tragic double murder.
The last photo of Brett is of him holding my friend's little sausage dog, little Dachshund. Those are my memories of Brett, and the pain doesn't go away because of the waste. Every time I'm taken back to the extreme sadness that people in our country can be so full of rage and so desensitized and so dehumanized that they can do that like that.
You know, people say time heals. It really doesn't. It's a fallacy.
The massive media publicity of the case has made it difficult for Brett and Richard's loved ones to move on. Some prefer to deal with their grief in private, while others like to engage with the media to keep the memory of Brett and Richard alive. For both Denise and Brian, reaching out to help other grieving people helps them cope with their own loss.
In our religion, in the Jewish religion, it's a belief that every time you remember someone who's passed soul, you lift them higher on their journey to heaven. And I feel that that's why it's important for me to do this, because it brings more of an awareness and it reminds people of these two wonderful men that we lost, keeps their legacy alive, and it keeps us aware of how fragile life is and how quick life can change and how we need to make the most of everything, because you never know when it can change forever.
You start thinking, maybe if he hadn't have stopped to pat the dog, you know, it would have been a matter of a few minutes. They wouldn't have seen him there. They would have gone on looking elsewhere. But it is what it is, and wrong place, wrong time.